Today, we're going to be hearing from two incredible speakers. Dr. Anna Holleman is a sociologist of religion at Duke University who focuses, among other topics, on understanding the role of religious leaders in offering mental health services, the health and well-being of religious leaders, and the shifting nature of the American religious landscape in contemporary culture. And then also, I am so pleased to let you know that the academic work that Anna will be presenting to us was actually just published in the journal American Medical Association Psychiatry Journal just yesterday. And if you're interested in receiving a copy of that formal academic work, we can make sure to get that to you. But we want to certainly congratulate Anna on her great work, and also really looking forward to hearing from her. In addition, we're going to be hearing from Reverend Scott Heare, who serves as the Executive Director of Congregational Mental Health Initiatives for the H.E. Butt Foundation in San Antonio, Texas. He's an ordained clergy person with more than 2 decades of local church experience in and out of socially entrepreneurial endeavors like the one that he is in right now. And in his role with the H.E. Butt Foundation, Scott is assisting congregations as they become offering kind of a continuum of care for mental wellness. So I'm going to turn things over to Anna to get things started. So Anna, welcome.
Thank you so much, Thad, for inviting me to speak today. This is a really important topic, a topic that's very interesting and important to me, but also I think has some very important practical applications today. And thanks to Scott, obviously, for being a great conversation partner in this, and really looking to forward to his part as well. So today, like Thad said, I'm going to be presenting some work that my co-author, Mark Chaves, who's also at Duke, and I have been working on concerning the role clergy play as providers of mental health care. So this first section, I'm going to do mostly background and methods. So if you can stick with me through the first part, the second and third will be a little bit heftier, but just giving you a warning up front. If I can get this to go. Okay, great. So jumping in, we know that a significant number of people turn to clergy for help with mental health issues. So the most recent approximation we have of this is that about a quarter of all people in the US seeking treatment for mental health disorders sought them first or primarily from a clergy person. And this has often led scholars to refer to clergy as frontline mental health workers, as they're often the first line of defense for their congregations or for their wider communities, for individuals who may be struggling in this way, either in referring people to outside mental health providers or in providing that assistance directly. However, few conclusions are actually established on this topic beyond the fact that clergy fill this role. So many questions remain, such as how commonly clergy are approached for help with mental health, as well as what clergy believe about mental illness. And specifically, it's a very, open question of the extent to which clergy accept contemporary medical wisdom about mental illness versus that believing mental illness stems from religious causes. And though some research has been done on this topic, it's relied on small, non-representative samples, and the results have been varied and mixed, and has not presented a clear conclusion. So in this study, the results I'm going to be presenting today are using data from the National Congregation Study and the National Survey of Religious Leaders. So these are two nationally representative samples of congregations and clergy from across the religious spectrum. So this includes mainline, evangelical, Black Protestant, Catholic, non-Christian, all across the spectrum. And the data I'm going to be presenting today are from primary leaders of religious congregations, so the solo or senior leader of religious congregations. So I'm going to walk through our methodology briefly, just so you know, again, how we get to our results, which I'll be presenting in the second and third section. But our focus today is going to be at 2 levels for the frequency of providing these services. So congregations providing services and clergy as individuals providing these services. So for measuring how often congregations assist people with their mental health, we use measures in which clergy were asked if their congregation provided support groups, events, classes, health-focused programs to help people with mental health conditions or mental illness in the past year. And we also asked clergy if they were ever approached individually for assistance with mental health issues, again, in the past year. And if clergy said they had been approached, we asked them how often that had happened. And we also wanted to know what clergy think and believe about mental health. So to do this, we had clergy read a short story describing an individual experiencing symptoms of major depression, and then ask them questions about their beliefs about this hypothetical situation. So the short story is on the screen right now. This is the story we presented to clergy in our sample. And it describes an individual experiencing the symptoms of major depressive disorder, which, as you can see, I've bolded the sort of salient details, but it includes feeling really down, feeling flat and heavy, feeling like nothing gives her pleasure, right, among other similar feelings. So we had every respondent read this vignette and then give their opinions about potential causes and potential treatments for the symptoms described in the vignette. So for potential causes, we asked each respondent how likely the person's situation was caused by three main types of causes. So first, we have a chemical imbalance or genetic or inherited problem, again, causing these symptoms described in the vignette, which we label as medical causes. And then we have lack of social support, a traumatic experience, or stressful circumstances, which we label as situational causes. And finally, we have demon possession or lack of faith, which we label obviously as religious or spiritual causes. So respondents could indicate that they found each of these potential causes likely to be a cause of these the symptoms in the vignette. So they could say all of them were likely or none of them were likely, or a mix in between. And then in addition to the causes, we also asked clergy about treatments that they thought would be helpful for this, again, hypothetical person. So first, clergy could indicate that they would encourage the person in the vignette to seek help from a mental health professional or to take medication prescribed by a doctor. Again, these would be medical treatments. And lastly, clergy could indicate that they would encourage the person to address their situation through religious activities, which we labeled as religious or spiritual treatment. So that's all the methods I have for you today. Thanks for, I know that gets kind of dry, but that's the lay of the land of the background and the methodology of our study. I'm going to hand it back to Thad to go into the breakout rooms, and then we'll circle back around to get into the results in a minute.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. And just wanted to let you all know that there's a question, a guiding question we're going to give for you to as we move into our breakout rooms. So as you're preparing to go into those breakout rooms, I want you to consider the following to help guide your discussion. And that is, what have you observed about congregations as frontline providers of mental health services? So what have you observed about congregations as frontline providers of mental health services? And depending on your experience, we acknowledge that this topic could be sensitive for some folks. So please know that you don't have to share, and please only share whatever you're comfortable sharing. And for those of you who are the recipients of whatever is shared, we ask that you do maintain confidence with those in your group, but you don't have to share anything personal by any stretch of the imagination. So again, our discussion question is, what have you observed about congregations as frontline providers of mental health service? And we'll go into our breakout rooms now. All right, welcome back, everyone. Hope that your conversations were robust, and I'm going to turn things back over to Anna, who's going to give us the first section in her findings from her research. So Anna, I'll turn things over to you.
So getting into the results. So first, like I outlined earlier, one of the main questions we wanted to answer is just how often do clergy and congregations provide assistance to individuals struggling with their mental health? So these are some findings, again, from the National Congregation Study and the National Survey of Religious Leaders. So we see that on a yearly basis, about 3/4 of clergy have been approached for assistance with mental illness in the past year, while about 1/4 of congregations have had some kind of group or activity or class for individuals struggling with their mental health. And so while a quarter is certainly not zero, it's not negligible, that does, represent a ton of resources from the congregational side. Looking at these two sort of bars together, we see that clergy are way more so the point of contact and service for mental health services at that individual one-to-one level, more so than the congregation-wide setting. So this figure shows the frequency with which head clergy were approached for help with mental illness in the past year, with the options ranging from more than once a month on the left to not at all on the far right. So again, most clergy were approached for help with mental health at some point in the last year. Importantly, I want to point out this 18, about 20%, about 1 in 5 clergy that were approached to help with a situation involving mental illness at least monthly in the past year. So I think what we find in our data is that most clergy are serving to help their parishioners and communities in this capacity. And not just that they're offering it, but they are being sought out to do so. And that's in addition, again, to their role as preachers and teachers and organizational leaders, and the more sort of typical things we think of when we think of pastors. We see that providing help to people struggling with their mental illness really is sort of a core part of that pastoral occupation. So now, moving from the frequency of providing these services into clergy's opinions about mental health and the kinds of attitudes and beliefs they're bringing into these encounters. Okay, so if you remember the short story I showed you earlier about, the hypothetical person experiencing symptoms of depression, what I'll show now is the results for the percent of clergy that indicated each of those potential causes or treatments that I went through earlier was at least moderately likely, with the potential causes of depression on the left and the potential treatments on the right. Pastors could potentially respond, again, I said this earlier, but I'll reiterate, could potentially respond that all of them were likely or that none of them were likely, and so these numbers won't add up to 100. But starting first with the situational causes of depression, so these stressful circumstances or traumatic experiences or lack of social support, these causes were the most frequently chosen by clergy in our sample, with almost all clergy saying that stressful circumstances or trauma was a cause of depression, and a majority of clergy saying a lack of social support. Next, I've highlighted the potential causes that we classify as a medical understanding of depression, and we see that the vast majority of clergy said that a chemical imbalance was likely the cause, and more than half said that a genetic problem or inherited trait was the issue. Looking at potential medical treatments, so the sort of medicalized understanding on the treatment side, we see that almost all clergy would encourage the person described in the vignette to see a mental health professional and to take prescribed psychotropic medication. Finally, I've highlighted the potential causes that we would classify as spiritualizations of depression or religious understanding of depression. And so we see that a minority of clergy said that a lack of faith or demon possession was likely a cause of depressive symptoms, and these were by far the least indicated potential causes of depression. In contrast, among the treatment side, we see that a large majority of clergy would encourage the individual in the vignette to address their situation with prayer or scripture reading or other religious activities. And so even though this religious option was the least frequently chosen treatment, this potential religious treatment was way more frequently chosen than potential religious causes. And so here's, sort of the entire figure. I know it's a lot of information, but when you view all of these potential causes and treatments together, it becomes really clear that the religious causes of depression were the least likely to be indicated as potential causes by clergy, and by a large margin. As at least twice as many clergy would indicate a medical cause as either of the religious or spiritual causes. However, I don't want to, downplay that, though they are the least likely to pick a religious cause of depression. This is still a non-trivial minority. 30% represents about 1 in 3 clergy saying that depression is caused by a lack of faith, which obviously is not negligible. And lastly, on this figure, I do want to point out that there does seem to be a difference in the way that clergy view religious causes and religious treatments of depression. As a minority of clergy said a religious cause was likely, but a large majority said that religious activities would be a likely appropriate treatment. So we're going to go into another break, but I want to emphasize again that, sort of previewing the third section, that clergy could say, could indicate that multiple of these were likely, right? The way we ask these questions. And so in the third section, I'm going to walk through the ways that clergy beliefs about the causes and treatments overlap and intersect in interesting ways, as well as obviously offer some concluding thoughts. But for now, I'll hand it back off to Thad again.
All right. Thanks so much, Anna. All right. So as we go into our breakout rooms, here's your guiding question. So as you think about what's been presented here, we're curious in how and in what ways might congregations partner with mental health professionals to provide mental health services? So how might congregations partner with mental health professionals to provide mental health services? Everyone, I hope that you were able to come up with a couple of ideas. What I'd like for you to do, if there was an idea that stood out to you in your conversation, pop it in the chat. Just put it in the chat. Let us hear from you about the idea that you came up in terms of how congregations might partner, pastors might partner with mental health professionals, provide mental health services. So feel free to pop that in the chat if there was something that stood out to you. And I'm going to turn things back over to Anna, who's going to give the third part of her presentation. We'll then turn things over to Scott Heare.
Okay, great. So yeah, so the final question that's sort of going to animate this last part of my presentation. So again, as I mentioned, right, these beliefs about potential causes and treatments can overlap. And so this allows us to examine the ways that sort of the Venn diagram, right, between a medical and spiritual understanding, and how do these overlap? How do these function independently? So in this figure, I'm going to present the breakdown of clergy who endorsed a totally medical, totally religious, or combined understanding of the cause and treatment for depression. So each of the four categories here represents the intersection between a specific medical cause or treatment of depression and any of the religious causes or treatments. So I know it's a little bit hard to sort of wrap our minds around, so I'm going to sort of walk through the figure a little bit more so than past figures. But so what's on the screen right now is the percentage of clergy who said that only a religious cause or treatment was likely, right? So on the far left, we have clergy who said that a religious cause of depression was likely, but not a chemical imbalance. Then clergy who said a religious cause was likely, but not a genetic issue. Then clergy who said they were likely to encourage the person in the vignette to engage in religious activities, but not see a mental health professional. And then finally, clergy who said they were likely to recommend engaging in a religious activity, but not take prescribed medication. So again, this is sort of the Venn diagram. This is the religious only section of the Venn diagram. But as you can see, across the board, it's a small minority who would endorse only a religious cause of treatment and not any of the medical causes or treatments. So next, I'm adding on sort of the middle of that Venn diagram. So this is the percentage of clergy in this sort of reddish color that said both the medical and religious causes of treatment, of depression was likely. And so you can see that these bars have expanded very quickly. And so what we have here is all of the clergy who said that a religious cause or treatment was likely, right? So if you combine them, everyone who said any of the religious causes or treatment, it's contained in these figures. But what you can see is that even when clergy do indicate a religious cause or treatment, that religious view of depression is overwhelmingly layered on top of a medical view of depression and does not replace it. And then lastly, I've added on the percentage of clergy who only indicated the medical cause, right? So this is the other, that last part of the Venn diagram, and not any of the religious causes or treatments. So one thing I want to highlight is that while about half of clergy view the cause of depression as purely medical, only about 15% of clergy view the appropriate treatment of depression as purely medical. And so while we see that clergy in large part seem to view the cause of depression as either purely medical or certainly not purely as a religious, primarily as a religious cause, while on treatment, there's much more of the overlap of the Venn diagram. So in conclusion, just a few thoughts to wrap up. Again, this is the first nationally representative study of this topic. And so we found that, this is new information for us to work with. We found that on the whole, clergy hold a view of mental health and specifically of depression that is overall in line with modern medical wisdom. Further, we found that when clergy do hold a religious view, it's mostly layered on top of a medical view and doesn't replace it or sort of push the medical view to the side. Alongside this finding, we did find that a non-trivial minority of clergy hold a solely religious view of the causes and treatment of depression. It's about 1 in 10 on the whole. But again, we think the 9 out of 10 is the point to emphasize that do endorse modern medical understanding. We also found that clergy approach the causes and treatments of depression differently, with clergy seeming to cede religious authority on the causes of depression, but not as much so on the treatments. And finally, in terms of thinking about sort of steps forward for our group and for our conversations going forward, we think these results bode really well for encouraging further collaboration between mental health professionals and clergy. We know these relationships, these collaborations are already happening. We think that this can be very encouraging for these to continue to happen. And especially as we know in our current context, the uptick of the prevalence of mental health disorders, there's a serious need around mental health care provision. And we hope that this can start to open a conversation to the ways that we can expand thinking about mental health care. So thanks so much. That's all I have. I've included the citation of the paper just in case you wanna Google it. Again, if you don't have access to it through the website, don't pay for it. That money goes into nowhere, basically. It will never reach me or anyone that I've ever met. So just email me and I'll send it to you. But for now, I'll hand it off to Thad, and really looking forward to Scott's discussion and to the Q&A in a little bit.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anna. All right, so we're going to turn things over to Scott Heare, but just to signal that we will have some time for Q&A beyond the hour. And so if you can stick around, we hope that you will, and I encourage you to begin getting your comments or questions ready. Scott, I'll turn things over to you. Tell us what's happening at in San Antonio through the H.E. Butt Foundation.
Yeah, thanks, Thad. I'm so excited to be here and privileged to be able to share what we're up to here in San Antonio. First off, I just want to congratulate Anna on all the work and the published article, everything that came with it. I had a little look, and it's amazing. And I have to say, once you find out what we're doing here, you'll know why Anna is my new hero. And I'm going to have a little picture of her in the corner, and I'm going to be touring her around as much as possible. But my name is Scott Heare. I've been a United Methodist pastor for about 28 years. And so I've seen lots of different things, lots of different sizes of churches, been on the entrepreneurial edge of some nonprofit kinds of things. And so that's a little bit about me, and that's probably enough. The H.E. Butt Foundation, who I now work for, has a long tradition of community engagement that has now begun in some really difficult parts of the nearest metro city, which for them is San Antonio. And mental health is one of the key pieces, along with narrative change work, equity work, and some other things that they are involved with. They are an impressive crowd. I just get to be a part of it. And what we are doing is we are standing up a resource center for congregational mental health. And our hope is to actually be a training center, amongst other things, for congregations and clergy, and equipping lay folk to be able to lead a mental health movement in San Antonio, to take us from the bottom 10 in the nation to the top 10 in the nation. So if you're in the top 10 in the nation, wherever you are, look out. here we come. And we're pretty excited about some of the initial traction that we have. There is some unique things about San Antonio, which make us an increasingly popular target for large grants. There's some really big ones that have been swimming around here in the last couple of weeks. And it has to do with our demographics. The demographics of San Antonio are generally considered to be the future demographics of the nation. We have about 65% Hispanic, and then everything else kind of flows in. The next largest group is considered white, and so we just kind of have a very different demographic than many places do, but they see that that's coming. So all of these folks that are coming our way are looking at us for two reasons. One is for those demographics, plus the unique way that San Antonio functions is we can actually kind of reach across the room. And I suppose what I mean by that is, even though he doesn't know me, I can probably meet with the mayor within about a week. And we're the 8th largest city in the nation. So we function much more like a small town. Collaboration has been a part of our world for a long time. And seeing some of these things rise is something that we really believe in. To give you an idea of what we are doing that's a little bit different, but includes everything that you're doing. And I want to encourage you to consider looking for becoming the people in your city or in your area that do what we're engaging. Looks like this. There was years ago, there was a moment when a gentleman was about to take over the mental health work for the nation. He was tapped by the White House to take part in that, and the Surgeon General in particular. Surgeon General was opening his statements, and it happened to be a week after they had a school shooting. And so the media was ready to ask questions to this mental health person, and they just came out and said, "What are you going to do about the mental health system in the nation?" He was about to answer, and the Surgeon General popped back in and said, "I'll take this question. Let me see if I've got it right. You want to know what we're going to do about the mental health system in our nation?" My answer is nothing. And it just silenced the media. He said, "Let's be clear. There is no mental health system in our nation. There is a medical health system, but there is no mental health system. Everything around mental health is crisis born. Language, the response, and the broken pathways that people have to maneuver themselves to find any kind of help. And all of us know that very, very well because of the frustrations that often that we see. So part of the hope was to find a solution for this broken system was for our foundation to say, well, what we need is an infrastructure. We need to have a switchboard. In New York City, at one point, there was no switchboard. So all the lines were just crazy and went from one place to another in order to have any kind of connection. And then the switchboard came along, and all of a sudden this infrastructure piece allowed for something that was needed to have an effective, efficient, and eventually an equitable way for everybody to connect and communicate. Our hope is to build that kind of infrastructure here in San Antonio. We are not going to do clinical work. We are connecting people to clinical work. We're not going to write resources. We are going to gather, vet, and then try to help people engage with resources. So there are 3 things that we're going to do to focus. The first is this. We're going to be a flagship for our city. A flagship that says that we believe, as you do, and we know, and Anna just amplified and put in bold and all the other nice things, that what it means to be a part of the congregation is to know that you're on the front line. And in particular, if you're a clergy person, you're on the front line of maybe a greater pandemic than the one we just saw, which is mental health. And in doing so, you need to be equipped. What they'll say is, like she said to you, 3/4 of the time they're talking to clergy, but less than 5% of clergy feel trained to recognize that they're talking to somebody with a mental health problem. Yes, I did think that that person was talking to me about Armageddon. I did think they were interested in my thoughts about Revelation. No, they were having a mental health problem. Yes, I did talk to the people that were having marital problems because I just thought she was hiding things from him. But once I found out later that having 5 hidden credit cards that were all maxed out may have something more to do with being bipolar, I realized that I'd missed that one too. I can't imagine how many I missed as a clergy. And so now to be increasingly trained feels like I'm being equipped and bringing confidence. Our flagship will be training clergy and caring for clergy, training congregations and caring for congregations. It will be in Spanish, it will be in English, and it will wrap things with the cultural mix. We'll be having what's called our congregational pilot, which starts this year, and it's our design build year. And we'll be all kinds of demographics, all kinds of languages, all kinds of work with a very rigorous capacity that's come out of the foundation. That's pretty exciting. We'll have a pastoral liaison and a connection with the cohorts that will be a part of our larger city effort. And then ultimately, one of my favorite pieces of our flagship is that we have what is called our Gladys's. Now, what these Gladys's actually do is Gladys comes from, if you have a grandmother named Gladys or your name is Gladys, then congratulations. But there was a Malcolm Gladwell piece that we were trying to figure out what the most important part of a hospital system was the doctors, nurses, administration, or the patients. It was none of those. It was these people that are often on the basement of the hospital systems that had everything covered in Post-it notes that were actually the billers for the insurance. And they knew how a broken bone was billed at blue, whatever, and in the other place in a totally different way. They actually knew all the coding. We're actually going to hire, employ, and engage these kind of Gladyses that will get to know every resource in the city, categorize every resource in the city, and then be at the end of a phone line to be able to navigate and be the switchboard for mental health for every single person, with the stipulation at the end of the call this person at this place, tell them we told you to call, and if you can't get connected, call us back and we will help you. Our goal is to make sure there's a warm, connected handoff from A to B, regardless of your ability to pay, your ability to speak English, or your ability to even fully understand what's going on in your world. We also want to build upstream workforce. We recognize that we really kind of over-professionalize everything. Sorry for the professionals. I'm married to one, so I'm not really that sorry. But ultimately, we've got to figure out how to get a whole lot of people employed in this. So we are working with Vikram Patel, Matthew Stanford, and a lot of different people to try to democratize this whole world and allow for everybody in different places and positions to be able to be empowered, trained, and confident to meet needs. Our last piece is we have a lab. That laboratory is going to be made up of a lot of the academics that are in this city and beyond it to do studies to make sure that we're being effective and efficient. And to think about what it might mean to be scalable as a city and as an organization, so that as we learn, others can discover that as well. This, again, like I said, is our design build year. We'll be doing branding, all the things that no nonprofit ever get to do, I'm getting to do, and I'm going to be willing to share with everyone, completely free. If you want really fancy, nice looking logos, I'll bring them to you. If you want everything as far as a structure piece, I'll give them to you. We're just so excited to be able to help and take part in this larger project. Last piece I'll tell you in this, and this I'll quit. Here's what's really true. I get really agitated when we talk about adding mental health to our churches. It doesn't make any sense to me to talk about it that way, because it feels like a supplement, a side thing. When the reality is mental health is discipleship. Mental health is discipleship. A pastor, a Bible study teacher, or a counselor, all on one side of the table, only want the person that has come for any kind of help to find the fullest and freest versions of themselves. I challenge people, find a miracle in the Bible that Jesus does that doesn't include mental health when you do bring it to him. Over and over and over, there's a reality to the call that we are kingdom people moving out now with the new tools that allow us to be more effective in the discipleship that we've been called to since the very beginning. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Scott. And we're going to enter into a time of Q&A with both Scott and also with Anna. Chris Adams from Biola is going to be moderating the Q&A for us. And so hope you have your questions ready. But one just note. So Anna has talked about the large kind of national trends. Scott has talked about a specific region within San Antonio. I do want you to note that if you're interested in making a local impact, obviously these two would be great resource folks for you. But in addition to that, a member of the Common Table Network, Laura Howe, is through Hope Made Strong. she is launching a cohort to help to understand how do you put these type of things, care, how do you offer care within the context of a local congregation in a really robust way. So I'm going to pop into the chat two different pieces. One is the website that Laura has stood up. I highly encourage you to take a look at that. And then also Laura's email as well. If you're interested in finding out more information, I really hope you'll tap her. Next week, she has two different informational sessions about this cohort model that she is developing, and it's launching really soon. Seats are very limited, so I hope that if you are interested, make sure you reach out to Laura. But I'm now going to turn things over to Dr. Chris Adams, who's going to moderate some Q&A. And so, Chris, take it away.
Thank you, Thad. And I want to add my endorsement of Laura Howe's work as well. So I really encourage you to check out what she's doing. And Anna and Scott, thank you so much. I feel free, everyone, to post questions in the chat or just unmute yourself here in just a moment. I wanted to start off with a question out of your research, Anna, but really for both of you. If I understood correctly, clergy see religious causes as significant in depression, but there's a gap between the causes and the treatment. And so I would love for both of you just to reflect on why do you think that gap is there and what can we do about that gap?
Yeah, I'll maybe jump in first. Well, so this is so one reason that I think is going on is there's actually been some research on this. It's by Andrew Abbott in like the 80s and 90s on a force of secularization, so sort of declining religiosity in the United States, is that the sort of purview of pastors has become really sort of honed in, where previously pastors sort of handled all the mental health stuff, but then there's sort of a rise of mental health professionals, and so pastors were a little bit honed in, and part of that was giving up the etiology but keeping the treatment side. And so I think part of that is that it's a larger sort of stream in sort of the changing nature of occupations and the ways that pastors function in the US. But I think it's a great thing that pastors say, hey, I have a real thing, contribution and way to assist people who are struggling. I think the causes is a little bit more sort of meaning making, while treatment is a little bit more like, where do we go from here? And I think if a pastor is going to sort of plant their flag, I think that it's great that it's on the sort of where do we go from here. But Scott, I'll let you do more.
Yeah, Scott, this may touch on your point, Scott, of how do we look at this holistically and not as mental health as a condiment or something to discipleship, but it's all one thing. But
it is, and I think that's been when I realized that so many clergy were being asked, and I knew that I was, but you never think about everybody else kind of thing because you're just in the battle. But when you get to see that note, you think, wow, that's a big deal, and then you realize how few people are really trained to be able to respond or even to discern what they're really engaged with. That what I've seen is really it's about that recognition. Wait a minute, you are seeing all of this, and how many times you've been, even pediatricians aren't trained to be able to discern when they're having kind of face-to-face with a mental health issue. Did you know that? No. But would you like some basic training? Yes. And then once they're trained, all of a sudden now they become more effective pastors. And so, for me, it does look a little bit like that, connecting those dots. It's the pastors that are resistant, hesitant, or have a process in their minds that say science is bad, academics are against us, which is increasing them even more of a political bent than it is a theological one.
Great, thank you for that. There is a Thad Austin imposter who has a question. I don't know your name, I'm sorry, but I see you have a question, so go ahead and unmute yourself and you can ask away.
And this is the one in the chat.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I've changed my name to Dale Fletcher. I'm sorry. I don't know. I have no idea how Thad's name got up on my profile. I'm late to this. I just logged in 5 minutes ago, so I apologize. maybe I should listen to the rest of the discussion first, but I'd like to throw out something. I've been engaged in ministry called Faith and Health Connection for about 20 years, just looking at spiritual health and its connection to the Christian faith. More recently, I have realized again and been reminded of the fact that our federal government does not recognize spirituality as a component of well-being. And so I think that, I guess what I'd just like to say is that even at a higher level, one of the reasons that our country is in the state it's in with its mental health crisis is the fact that our leaders of our health agencies and our government don't acknowledge that mental health is really a spiritual health issue. And I don't know if there's anything that this group or those of you that are connected with other members can do to be an advocate for our health agencies and our government to acknowledge that the spiritual component of health is part of whole person health. And if it was formally recognized, I think it would push down resources and the availability of dollars for research, et cetera, all the way down and trickle down to the congregational level as well. So that's the comment I wanted to make.
Thank you, Dale. It does seem like research-wise, particularly in positive psychology, there's a lot of research about spirituality and mental health and so forth. And I'm curious from a research side, or Scott, it sounds like if you can call the mayor and hang out in a week, you figured out how to work with government entities. How would both of you respond to Dale's concern?
I'm going to immediately defer to Anna because I feel like I need to pretty much all day. But I do have a couple of thoughts. So go ahead, Anna, please.
Sure. I mean, I would just say that, I don't want to go too much beyond, sort of what I prepared for today in terms of specific numbers, just because I don't want to lead anyone astray. But I think we do know that congregations do collaborate often with government officials, like maybe not the White House, but often within their local sort of communities, cities, sometimes state governments. We do know that collaboration is happening. Maybe it's on the health piece, maybe it's in, different sort of causes, just depending on sort of the needs of the community. But I think this is happening to a certain degree. I mean, I think a big theme of what Scott's talked about, so this maybe will be me handing the baton back, will be that we need everyone, basically, all of the different pieces in the equation need to be thinking about mental health more. And so I think maybe it's a little bit more of a bi-directional relationship, but certainly mental health needs to be a bigger part of the conversation.
Because it also seems like, I'd be curious how you respond to this, Scott. It seems like maybe what's hard to quantify, but often isn't talked about, is the enormous amount of preventative mental health work clergy are doing just by having churches that gather and do what churches do. How enormously beneficial that is from a preventative perspective. So the federal government, you're welcome for everything pastors do.
Well, what I'd say is, just for encouragement, in about an hour, I'll be meeting with a city convened group that will include the major universities in the city, us as a foundation for the convening space. We have what's called a faith liaison that's employed by the city of San Antonio that connects the dots between the churches and the city's needs. Part of it was from a study that came out a few years ago, which was a recognition that about 30% of the social work in any given city is done by the church. And so one of the questions to most civic leaders is, if 1/3 of your care came from a corporation, would you answer the phone if they called? And so that builds up pretty quick into your faith liaisons. And then it's important for the faith community to be able to know how to respond. And so we're developing a lot of that work and so when you have all of the different folks in the same rooms and you're doing collaborative work, it becomes really interesting really fast. And so just for that encouragement. And then not to mention that, in our state, things are, as you might imagine, a little more unique. And we'll have, no doubt, there will be financial opportunities for us to take part in at least organizing some of the things that are coming up out of our upcoming budget. As a unique and strange reality, the policy analyst for the subcommittee on mental health in the Texas Health and Human Services Department, there's one policy analyst they have a $188 billion budget in Texas for the legislator. Mental health is the third priority, which is huge in Texas. And the policy analyst who's influencing that is my son.
No kidding.
Of course, I can't talk to him about it because just having dinner with him, he's lobbying him. But it is fascinating to know that there are faithful people in powerful and important places, and real work being done in concert. And so I think Anna's study will help that along, and it creates opportunities to talk to academics and faith and civic leaders as well.
Oh, that's really encouraging. I think maybe we have time for one more short question. If anybody has a burning question you can't get off of this webinar without asking. Anybody? Yes, Scott, I see that hand.
I just have a really fast question. And it really was to do with the questions about faith. When the clergy's answered that there were 30% kind of was a lack of faith answer in that, was the questions, were those based around not having enough faith or not having faith at all? Like, which way was that question?
It was literally worded lack of faith. So I suppose in that way it was open to interpretation, which is not a helpful answer, but it's what I have.
It helps me a little bit, because that's what I would wonder, is there would be people that like me would say not lack of faith as in, they didn't have enough. Like, I would never answer that. But if they didn't have faith, like Chris was mentioning before, that affects their mental health. So that would be the only thing that I was wondering about.
Yes, thanks so much, Chris and Anna and Scott. Thank you all for being here today. And for the really wonderful conversation. I'll just remind you again to go back up in the chat, grab Laura Howe's information if you're interested in how you can make a local impact. One of the things I'm so incredibly encouraged by Scott's work is it's a first mover. Somebody said, I'm going to do something. Somebody put their hand up and said, this stops today with me because I'm going to do something. So this is a next step that we want to offer for you. Also, I'll just provide a brief instruction. There's a link in the chat that will take you to an evaluation. It's one question to help us to know how we did today. And also, after you finish that, it will lead you to a registration page for our next gathering, which is going to take place on Thursday, February 2nd at 1:30 p.m. Eastern. Dr. Scott Thuma from Hartford International University is going to be coming and talking about the impact of the pandemic on congregations. So we really hope that you'll join us for that. And we are so grateful again for Chris and for Scott and Anna for your time today. Anna, congrats on the publication. And if you do want a copy of that, make sure to reach out to Anna directly, or you can reach out to me and I'll make sure to connect you. Thank you all so much for being with us today, and we will see you next month.